I can't see everybody, so tell me who we've got. I see Lynn.
Yeah, so far it's just Lynn and yourself for our council.
Hello?
Hello, Michelle.
Hi, thank you. I needed a sound check.
Well, you didn't do it the right way. It's got to be check 1 2, check 1 2.
I'm not that good. Trust me.
No, it sounds wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll give it a few minutes.
And then I'm prepared to share all the documents for our meeting, including the meeting minutes from our last meeting in December. So when we're ready for that, I will share my screen.
Well, we need at least one more member.
Yeah.
I just checked with Roger, and he's not aware of anybody. He hasn't been contacted by anyone who's having trouble getting into the meeting here. So,
all right. I've never not had a quorum. How, oh, here we go.
Hello, this is Hadley Connor. I'm in. Thank you.
Hi, Hadley.
hello, Hadley.
You're making our day, Hadley.
Yeah.
Hello.
All right. What time do we have? 3 after? Shall I give it one more minute, guys?
Sure.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah, let's give it one more minute.
At least we're still in the position of never not having a quorum, right?
Right. Okay, I have 104. So let's call this meeting to order and welcome those of you who have joined us. And let's just move right into this. Michelle, do you want to start us off with a roll call?
Yes. When I say your name, could you say present, please? Mark Ellery?
Present.
Steve Austin? Lynn Hamilton? Lynn's here, but he's not talking. Lynn, can you hear me? Lynn?
He looks frozen.
Yeah, he might be frozen.
Hadley Connor?
Present.
Thank you. Brent Erickson?
And Brent will not be joining us today.
Okay, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4. No, I have 3 out of 5. Is that correct?
Correct.
So we do have a quorum.
This raises an interesting question, though, with Lynn frozen.
He's coming back. Oh, nope.
Yeah, he should be back with us shortly.
Okay. Why don't we just give it a minute? The question being, with a member frozen and pivotal for the quorum, I guess we need an attorney to look at that one, huh?
Yeah, these are new territory.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the open meeting law specifically addresses virtual meetings, but I would assume that if they're frozen or you don't have that line of communication, you can basically consider them not to be present.
Yeah.
That's what I would think, just to play it on the safe side. So
Right.
Do we have his phone number?
yeah, I can look for it here.
Christy.
So I think you can still have a meeting. You just can't make any decisions.
Okay. All
I
right.
apologize. This
Oh,
is Lynn. I'm here.
All
Oh,
right.
hi, Lynn.
I had the
Did you
internet
just
decided to go down right as I started, so I apologize.
You know,
Glad you're
interesting. We had a Zoom meeting earlier this morning, and it was really messed up for some reason. But okay, well, welcome back, Lynn. Michelle, you've made it through the roll call.
Yes, we have.
All right.
Only allowed to do roll call for the members of the council.
Okay. We have. Let's see. Let's just keep rolling right down the list here. The approval of our last meeting's minutes. Can one of you give me a motion to approve these minutes?
Motion to approve.
Okay, a second.
I second that.
All right. Well, it's moved and seconded to approve the minutes. Any discussion on those minutes?
Who seconded it? Was it
That
Lynn?
was Lynn.
Okay, thanks, Lynn.
Any discussion? Okay, hearing none. The question on the motion to move the minutes. Those in favor for approving those minutes as drafted of our December 10th meeting, say yay.
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 And those opposed say no. No opposed. The minutes are approved and we can move on. Next on the schedule, the update. Kevin, it's all yours. Kevin, you there?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I'm here. I haven't frozen up yet.
Okay.
All right. Sorry, I'm just getting organized between my two screens here. So, all right. So the first item that we have on the agenda from, I'm going to admit somebody else. First item we have on the agenda here, just for a weights and measures update, is a legislative update. And so the biggest news for weights and measures in the Department of Agriculture is the continuation bill. In this case, House Bill 2081, which will continue the Department of Agriculture until 2029. So July 1st, 2029, it's a continuation for 8 years. That bill's passed the Senate, and it's expected to be sent to the governor's office. So that's good news for us. that will continue for another 8 years, and that's how it looks like at this point in time. And then there's no update at the current point in time on our budget at this point. So we're still waiting to see what our budget for fiscal year 22 is going to look like, and if it will be any different than it was for fiscal year 21. Also, to my knowledge, there are no other bills currently in the legislature that relate to the Weights and Measure Services Division. So it seems to be a pretty quiet year for us in that respect. And that's really all I have for the legislative update.
Okay.
Now, in regards to COVID, if you recall during our last meeting, our investigators were still restricted on what types of inspections they could conduct. On February 1st, that restriction was lifted, and our investigators are performing all of the different types of inspections that they are assigned. So we're back in the retail stores, grocery locations, doing all of those indoor inspections that we were previously restricted from. So that makes things a little bit easier for us as far as working around and being efficient with our inspections. So, you know, if we go to a fuel station, for instance, previously with the restrictions, we couldn't do the price verification and price posting inspection inside the convenience store. But now we're able to do that at the same time on the same visit. So that helps increase our efficiency. And we don't anticipate any additional inspection restrictions in the future unless COVID starts to turn kind of in the opposite direction. I know, you know, things are starting to be loosened up with people receiving vaccinations and such. And so we're continuing to try and do business as usual in regards to COVID. And that's all I have for the Weights and Measures update.
Okay, great. Let's keep moving. Marijuana.
All right, so marijuana inspections. I have a presentation here for us, and I'll share my screen. Give it a moment to load up there. Okay. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about our newest inspection program, and that is marijuana inspections. We're going to get right to it here. If you recall, during our last meeting, we discussed the Auditor General findings. In particular, this program relates to the finding where Weights and Measures did not inspect scales and packaged goods at licensed marijuana facilities. And as previously discussed, there were concerns about our authority to enter and inspect marijuana facilities. The Auditor General had determined that Weights and Measures did have the authority to enter and inspect marijuana facilities, and our own Assistant Attorney General also confirmed that authority to inspect. So with that clarified, basically we had nothing left to do but develop an inspection plan. So this, of course, is a new industry for Weights and Measures, although we have licensed marijuana facilities for several years now, ever since the beginning of the medical marijuana initiative. The scales at those facilities had been licensed with us. But as far as actually conducting inspections, we really weren't familiar with the industry. We've been involved here and there at the National Conference on Weights and Measures, in task groups related to cannabis. But that's really where our knowledge ended. And so at the time where we were starting to develop our inspection plan, we had 1,462 scales licensed at 220 locations. And since then, additional locations have been established. We reached out to the Arizona Dispensary Association because we wanted to establish that relationship with the association and their members that we were going to inspect with our expectations going forward, their expectations, and just develop that relationship to start everything off on the right foot. And on January 28th, we held a meeting with the Dispensary Association, Department of Health Services, as well as our Weights and Measures representatives. And we gave a presentation about what to expect during a Weights and Measures inspection, how we're involved in regulating the marijuana industry, what our staff look like, what our inspection documents are like, so that by the time we get into the facilities, there are fewer surprises and people maybe aren't caught off guard as much. And the presentation and inspection letter that we drafted, at the end of the meeting, they were provided to the Dispensary Association for distribution amongst their members. And it's funny that when I was working on this presentation, I actually was contacted by a dispensary last week who mentioned that they had received our meeting presentation, and they said, hey, that was extremely helpful. You know, they were calling me because they wanted to de-license their scales. They read our presentation and said, well, our scales don't meet the definition of a commercial device. This is what they're used for. I had that conversation with them, and I confirmed that, yep, your scales don't need to be licensed. So the information that we developed for industry is being distributed. It is out there and people are paying attention to it. And even when our investigators have gone into facilities, they said, oh, hey, yeah, we knew you were coming. We appreciate, you know, knowing what your uniforms are like. You know, we have strict security standards and so on. So that really helps set us at ease, you know, when you come to do an inspection. The other thing that the Dispensary Association was gracious enough to provide for us was facility tours. So they actually coordinated some tours of marijuana facilities here in the Phoenix area for our Weights and Measures staff. Myself and our compliance manager, Vince Wolpert, attended the tours, as well as some representatives from the Department of Health Services. So we got to see firsthand what the facilities are all about, and their business operations and their design, and trying to answer a lot of those questions ahead of time before our investigators get there and you know, may have an issue initiating an inspection, or may not understand what this scale is used for, or what this facility is actually doing. And so it was very beneficial and educational. It's a completely new experience for me. And we really appreciate the Dispensary Association for providing us with that opportunity. So on February 10th, we visited 3 different facilities, and I'll get more into that here in a minute. Here's a picture from one of the facilities, and you know, in the past, I guess I didn't realize the scale of these operations, but this is a grow room at one of the facilities, and these are just plants, different strains of marijuana or cannabis that are being grown for cultivation.
Granger?
I'm sorry, did somebody have a question, comment? Just as a reminder, if you are on the meeting and you're not speaking, if you could please mute yourself. That way there's just no audio feedback. But I'll continue on here. And so this is a grow room, and this particular facility actually didn't have a dispensary. What they did is they grew the plants, they cultivated them, and they made products that were then sold to dispensaries. And so they had a packaging operation as well. But I mean, just the scale of these operations is really impressive. And the amount of technology and science that goes into growing plants and getting them of a certain variety and getting a certain output from the plants, a certain content of you know, whatever the consumer may be looking for, whether that's THC or a particular flavor or scent or whatever it may be. So there's a lot involved in it that I didn't realize before. So as I mentioned, there are different types of facilities. There's the dispensaries, which that's the retail side of thing. That's what the consumer is going to experience. So they have those direct consumer transactions. And one of the facilities that we went to, I got to witness a consumer transaction. The representative from the Dispensary Association who was leading us around, he demonstrated a consumer transaction using a medical marijuana card. And there's different regulations as far as medical marijuana versus adult use, which is the recreational program, as far as how much marijuana people can possess and purchase at any given time. The dispensaries can be licensed for medical or adult use. Most are licensed for both. I think there's only a handful of them out there that are licensed, for one or the other. Most of the dispensaries that were previously licensed as medical just added on an adult use license. They applied for it once the initiative passed and the program was available. And that's what we saw at the one particular dispensary that we went to. The other two facilities that we went to are more grow and cultivation facilities. Now, the first location that had the dispensary, in the back of the facility, they were actually developing a grow facility, and it was really quite state of the art. There was a lot of thought put into the design, as in terms of productivity and how much they could grow and cultivate, to maximize, I guess, their investment as well as the efficiency of their operations. The other two facilities were more in like a converted warehouse environment. And there, that's where the marijuana is grown. That's where new strains are created. Something that I didn't know about plant cloning, where they'll actually have what are called mom plants or mother plants. And what they'll do is they'll trim a stem off the plant. They'll treat the bottom of the stem with like a root growth hormone, and then they'll plant that stem and grow a completely new plant based off of this mother plant. And so they're actually cloning these plants. If there's a particular strain that's popular or something that does well at retail, then they're actually cloning, and they'll keep these mother plants going so that they can make additional plants and keep that chain going along. Marijuana, we witnessed it being cultivated from drying the stems to a room where people were trimming the flowers off of the plants. They make concentrate, they make products that are packaged, loose flower products. So that's the part that would be combusted or smoked. They create edible products. You're familiar probably with brownies. They have gummy products, pretty much anything that can have that marijuana concentrate in there. And then they have other types of prepared products. At the one particular facility, we were watching them package like a resin type material. They called it shatter. And it looked like a peanut brittle, but it was ounce pieces of basically a marijuana resin. And that was really interesting to see how that worked out. As I said before, dispensaries and grow or cultivation facilities may be at the same location. And so what we're trying to do right now is differentiate these locations in our database. So we know, okay, where are the retail locations that we need to be concerned about things like scales, possibly price posting, price verification, and where are the locations that are supplying these dispensaries with the product that we may have concerns about, a product not meeting its labeled quantity statement, or not having the correct type of packaging, anything of that nature. The interesting part about this industry compared to other industries when we do packaging inspections is that in Arizona, the marijuana products cannot cross state lines. So everything that is consumed in Arizona is grown in Arizona. And that's rare for us, because if you think about other products like, a box of cereal, a granola bar, bottled water, whatever it may be, there's a good chance that that product is not packaged within our state. And so if there's ever an issue with a particular lot of product and we need to contact that manufacturer, a lot of times we have to rely on weights and measures agencies outside of our state to follow up with whatever type of issue there may be. But as far as marijuana, we know where all of the locations are that are packaging these products, and we've coordinated with the Department of Health Services. They provide us an updated list when they have new licensees. We've cross-referenced our list to make sure that the information we have in our database is accurate as well. So the biggest takeaways from tours is that the industry representatives are very proud of their businesses and products, and I was pleased to see that. They were very welcoming for us. They wanted to show off their operations and what they have. I think they're excited that they can finally have this legitimate business operation and be there for the consumers in Arizona. Make the products that they're proud of, and so it was really interesting to see that. And it was a great experience. It's a very competitive industry, and there is, a high demand for it, obviously, because the adult use program is relatively new. So there's a lot of people taking advantage of that. But with so many different businesses here within the state, it is very competitive. And so with that comes a extreme concern for quality, to make sure that, hey, we're producing the best product, that we're maintaining our reputation, that our consumers are getting what they're paying for. And so that is, what we like to see. And so that was a positive takeaway from the tours as well. The facilities, whether it was a brand new constructed facility or it was a renovated existing building, they're very state of the art. Obviously, when you're growing the plants, when you're making different types of product, you need to have those environmental controls in place. You need to have the technology to report, the quantity of what you're creating. A lot of that is tracked through the Department of Health Services. And of course, there's the security aspect of it, and there's a lot of technology involved in there as well. Not only, from external parties to make sure that, nobody's entering the facility that shouldn't be, but also to make sure that the inventory, there's no loss, basically, of the inventory inside of the facilities. And so there were certain security protocols that we had to go through at different facilities, but each one had a certain procedure that we had to follow. And so that was good to experience, so we could communicate that to our investigators right off the bat, to kind of give them an idea, hey, this is what to expect going forward. The one thing that was surprising was that out of all the facilities we visited, none of them had scales that were in commercial use. We saw plenty of scales, but they were used for in-house packaging. And our statute, the definition of a commercial device, which is ARS 3-3401-13, specifically provides an exemption for in-house packaging devices. And so anything that is used to package a product that will then be presented and sold to a consumer in its packaged form, not by random weight at the time of the transaction, that is considered an in-house packaging scale. And so all of these facilities that are packing products for distributions to dispensaries, those are packaging scales. They don't need to be licensed with us. The dispensaries, a lot of them now have already portioned out product, and they've already packaged it right off the bat, so they don't have any scales right there at the retail counter. There are a few, we call that a deli style transaction, but there are a few that we visited that had those, and I'll get into that information here in a minute. But we must have seen at least 50 scales at these 3 different facilities, and none of them, we asked plenty of questions, none of them were in commercial use. So that showed us right there, hey, maybe we need to look into this and work with industry on communicating, hey, this is what is commercial and needs to be licensed, and this is what is not. We also noticed that packaging and labeling requirements will likely need to be addressed. We saw many different types of packages for many different products, and there are concerns about labeling the quantity statement, not having U.S. customary units printed on there, not presenting that information on the principal display panel of the product, the different types of containers that might be allowing moisture to escape, therefore causing the weight of that product to change after it's been packaged. And so that'll be the next phase of our inspections after we get the scale sorted out here. So our initial scale inspection sample, after talking with our department director, Mark Killian, and our deputy director, Jeff Grant, and explaining kind of our thoughts after going on the tour and saying, hey, I think this is what we need to do, it was determined that because we saw none of the scales in commercial use, we needed to do a survey and get a good enough sample to say, okay, what percentage of locations out there actually have commercial devices? So out of the 220 that we had at the time, we selected 60 locations, which is a little bit more than a quarter, including 11 that had previously received consumer complaints. That was one thing that the Auditor General and the legislature wanted us to follow up on, were consumer complaints that our division had previously received, yet we forwarded to the Department of Health Services because that was the procedure at the time. So those 11 facilities were included in that initial sample. The locations were divided evenly amongst 6 investigators, so they each had 10 locations. And 3 of those investigators were equipped with our precision metric weight kits to actually test the scales. The other 3 were only visiting the facilities to conduct scale use surveys. So to go in and see, okay, what type of facility is this? How are they using the scales? Are they commercial or not? And we added on some additional tasks for those investigators when they were visiting those locations as well. But those inspections began on February 16th, and we've completed most of them by now. We still have a few of them yet to go. Just as an example, so you know what we're working with here, on the left is an example of an accuracy class 2 scale. This particular make and model is very, very common, not only in marijuana facilities, but also at pawn shops, jewelry shops, places where people might be buying gold or precious metals from consumers. And the reason that I wanted to talk about this for a minute is that these scales are a little bit different than what you might find at your grocery store. They're much more sensitive, and with that, the tolerances are more stringent as well. Environmental factors such as, you know, air movement, if you have an air conditioning vent blowing on the platter of this scale, that will cause the reading on the scale to fluctuate. If it's not level, it will be, you know, it will have a significant amount of error just from that. Because those tolerances are so stringent, we have to use a special type of weight kit, which is a Class F1 precision weight kit. And these weight kits are, again, different than what we would use to test, you know, a scale at a grocery store or a typical retail establishment. The weights actually need to acclimate when we take them into a facility. So if they've been in our vehicle, they need 30 minutes to adjust to the temperature. They need to not experience any harsh vibrations, because those vibrations can actually resonate within the weight and cause the weight to be out of tolerance, even if you're holding it in your hand when you're wearing a cotton glove to isolate you from the actual weight, and you don't feel a vibration or anything like that, the weight can still carry that for a significant amount of time. So they're very, very sensitive. Typically, they're handled with either tweezers or a special type of tool that lifts these larger weights up. And you can't touch them with your bare skin. The oils from your skin may actually affect the tolerances on these weights. So it's important to know that, because these inspections, if we find scales, that already adds another 30 minutes onto an inspection, just waiting for the weights to acclimate. And these would be the same weight kits that we would use to test our own packaging scales that would be used to test packaged goods at marijuana facilities. So that's one thing when we're looking at an efficiency perspective. Sometimes there are factors that we just can't avoid. If we want to do our inspection properly, we have to let these weight kits acclimate before we use them. And so we try to find opportunities. Well, what can we do to fill that 30 minutes? You know, sometimes we'll record the device information right away. If there's, you know, a price posting or price verification inspection that can occur while the weights are being acclimated, we'll do that first. Those are the type of things that we think about. But this is what the weight kit looks like. Now, the scale on the left is a lot bigger than the actual weight kit in this picture, but the weight kit's much larger than the scale. And the weight kits will go down to fractions of a milligram. to ensure that we're, hitting that scale at the right points when we're testing it. So our inspection findings, we visited 57 locations so far, having a total of 407 scales licensed. Out of those 57 locations, or 407 scales, we've delicensed 376 of them so far because they were not used commercially or the location no longer had them. One thing that we learned is when the COVID pandemic began, a lot of the locations that had previously conducted deli-style transactions no longer did it that way because they were trying to create an opportunity for the consumers to distance themselves and not have that scale right up in front of the consumer where an employee might be working and touching the scale, touching the product, that type of thing. So that's why they went to more of a prepackaged method of sale. But like I said, there are still a few facilities out there that are doing the deli-style transactions. We only tested 14 scales, and with those 14 scales, 8 scales were found to have error in favor of the consumer. So again, the investigators, only 3 of them had the weight kits to test the scales. So out of the 30 or so scales that we actually found in commercial use, some of those locations were visited by investigators that did not have weight kits. And so those have been, locations have been recorded for a follow-up inspection to test the actual scales present. So 51 out of 57 locations visited, or 89%, did not have or did not require a commercial device license, and that's a pretty significant number. So what we're going to do is communicate these findings to the Department of Health Services, the Dispensary Association. We're going to educate the industry representatives about commercial devices, what is and what isn't a commercial device. The goal is to get people to evaluate their own facilities and figure out, okay, these scales don't need to be licensed. Let's close our license because it's not necessary, which would not only save our staff a lot of time from not having to then visit those facilities. We would in the future to conduct packaging inspections, at which time we would, verify that, okay, they really don't have scales in commercial use. But also it would be less burdensome to the industry because they don't have to worry about their annual device license, renewing those device licenses, paying that device license fee that doesn't align with our statute. So we will conduct inspections of the remaining scales that are licensed, and once we work with industry and have people start closing licenses, we'll see what's left over, and those are where we'll basically start first and go from there. So again, we'll evaluate the commercial use of scales found during packaging inspection. So when we go into a facility, likely they are going to have those scales, if we're testing their marijuana products that are packaged. And so we'll make sure every time we go back and follow up that, yep, their scales are still not being used commercially, and if they are, then we'll be sure that a license is established. But I think it'll be very unlikely, based off of what we've seen so far, that facilities will add additional scales in the future that will need to be licensed. In most cases, they'll just continue doing those in-house packaging procedures, so the scales won't meet our definition of a commercial device. Finally, I'll touch a little bit on packaging inspections. As I said, this is our next phase. So when we've been doing our scale inspections and surveys, our investigators were instructed to gather some product data or even unused tear, which would be those empty packages, during the scale inspection surveys to have that as a good starting point for information. When we do a packaging inspection, the best thing to have during that inspection is unused tear, or the unused packaging, because the way it works is you'll take a sample from a particular lot of product that's displayed for sale. And if you don't have unused tear, you have to open at least 2 packages to make sure that you can get an average tear weight. because that weight will then be used for all the additional packages as a deduction for the tare. So, if you have a product that their package weighs, a quarter of a gram, 0.25 grams, and the package is supposed to contain 1 gram of product, the package with the product inside should weigh at least 1.25 grams. So if your average tare is that 0.25 grams, you can just continue sticking those 1 gram packages on the scale, and as long as everything weighs 1.25 or higher, you know that you're good. But if you have anything lower than that, then that's where you need to look into and go, okay, does this not meet our maximum allowable variation for this particular product? Does this factor, if you conduct standard deviation, does this factor into the lot as a whole of not meeting that maximum allowable variation? And so that's the reason the unused tare is very important. And we've actually collected a few samples of that. It's another advantage of conducting inspections at the packaging facility, because a lot of times they have those empty packages already available, and they can just pull them out for us and say, yep, this is what we're packing it in, and we can use that to get our tare. We do the same thing a lot at grocery stores, where they package, the meat at the meat counter or in the deli. We'll get the containers, whether it's the foam trays, the soaker pads, the plastic wrap. We'll have them run a tray through the machine, have it wrapped, put a label on it. It just won't have any product inside, and that way we can get that tare value right away, rather than having to potentially destroy any packages or open them up. Another thing that is still developing is the standards for marijuana products that are being discussed in NCWM and ASTM. So we are following that closely, and we'll continue to be involved in that at an NCWM level in establishing those standards. That was one discussion we had with the facilities we toured, where we were saying, well, this is technically the standard here and there, and they said, well, I don't think that's practical, because we have to put this statement on it and that statement on it. And we said, well, the best way to get that resolved or get an exemption or do anything like that is to have it considered in NCWM, because ultimately it'll be voted on there and then incorporated into one of our handbooks. So that was a discussion that we had. The trouble with this particular industry is that from a federal perspective, marijuana is still seen as illegal. And so there's a lot of bits and pieces that would apply to other particular commodities that won't apply to marijuana just because they're not included, because from a federal government perspective, they're not included here and there. That being said, they're still trying to incorporate at a national level some standards in our handbooks, and there's a lot of standards that we can already use, as far as the tolerances for packages that are sold by weight or volume. A lot of the test procedures are fairly simple for those products. One of the things that we're going to have to consider in the future is a potential moisture allowance, particularly for the cannabis flower, because even after it's cultivated and dried out, it could potentially still lose some moisture. And so we have to figure out, well, what's that a moisture allowance for that product, so that we can apply that into the tolerance and make sure that product is not being taken off sale that actually meets the standards. So those last 2 points I just highlighted there, and that's pretty much all I have. Again, there will be some labeling that we have to talk about as well. We didn't see any packages with U.S. customary units printed on there. The packages are pretty elaborate, some of them, and so we may have to work with industry on finding a compromise in regards to the standards that we enforce. So anybody have any questions at this point? Mark?
Yeah, that's really fascinating stuff, Kevin. One thing just came to mind for clarification. Weights and measures is really focused on weight and volume on this, as opposed to the quality aspect of it, the THC content and all that. Is that DHS, you said?
That is correct. Yeah. So the Department of Health Services actually now has a testing program, and they require testing of the products I honestly don't know the interval on how often they have to report that information, but that program is established. One of the concerns that our department director, Mark Killian, had was that marijuana is an agricultural crop, just like fruit and vegetables and everything else that the Department of Agriculture regulates. Yet, the Department of Agriculture wasn't written into the medical marijuana or adult use marijuana initiatives. And so we don't really have regulatory authority over it as far as a crop. And there were concerns about, well, we want to make sure there's no, illegal pesticides or pesticides inside these cannabis products that shouldn't be there. Well, that's something that the Department of Health Service is already covering. They're already doing that testing, and we've been in communication with them about that. But from a weights and measures perspective, we are mainly concerned about, does that product meet its labeled quantity statement? If it says it has a gram in there, is there actually a gram in there? If it says it's however many ounces, does it have that many ounces inside? And then, of course, the scales. Are there any scales that are in commercial use that we need to inspect and test and make sure that they comply with our regulations?
Okay. Questions?
And one thing I'll highlight as well in regards to your question, Mark, is that our handbook, which is NIST Handbook 133, which we adopt into our rule, that's where our packaging test procedures are. I learned very quickly that the name of that handbook is misleading when it relates to marijuana, because it's called Checking the Net Contents of Packaged Goods. And so when you think of contents, you could think of chemical content or whatever type of ingredients may be in there. And what we're really concentrating on, again, is just that quantity statement, whether it's weight or volume or whatever it may be.
Right. It's interesting. Not that I know anything about it, but the THC content is sort of the player here, sort of like octane with fuel. So I guess that'll just be the market that plays out as far as who makes the best stuff.
Yeah, I believe so. Our state agricultural lab does test hemp products to ensure that it does not have, a certain level of THC in there, because then that changes the product from hemp to marijuana. So we are, not our division in particular, but the state agricultural lab and other divisions within agriculture, they do concentrate on that aspect of it. But as far as the actual cannabis, marijuana products and what they say they have inside, that's for the Department of Health Services.
Good. Well, thanks for the answers. Does anybody else have any questions for Kevin on the dispensary? If not, let's keep moving on, Kevin. Next on the agenda, the risk-based inspection.
Certainly. All right, and so rather than doing a presentation, I wanted this to be interactive, because what Weights and Measures is looking for from the Advisory Council is guidance in regards to what is a risk-based inspection approach. And so before we get heavily into the audit findings, I just wanted to remind our council members of everything that Weights and Measures does, all of the different types of inspections that we have, because when we're called upon to develop a risk-based inspection approach or consider that, we have to take into account everything that we do. A lot of times, from what I've been reading about risk-based inspection approaches, that means you kind of pick and choose based on particular types of data, whatever risk factors you're going to concentrate on. And so what that may end up doing, depending on which way this goes, is leaving some of these inspection categories out of the picture. So what I have here, it's called a Jamboard. And typically, we've used this before in our own staff meetings. when trying to make decisions, when trying to brainstorm about different projects. And it is an application offered through Google where technically it could be shared with individuals, and then they can simultaneously type and add information onto these frames rather than slides. Now, what I'm going to do here today is be the note taker for the council members, just because I wasn't sure if everybody would be on their computer and have the ability to collaborate together, so I figured we'd do that verbally. But going forward here, these are all the different types of inspections that we have, and there's like 17 different types of inspections. Everything from motor fuel meters, those are your fuel dispensers or gas pumps, to your scales, small and large capacity, pricing. We have other types of meters, LPG, and one of our relatively new programs, CNG, compressed natural gas. Packaged commodities, which we just talked about quite a bit in regards to marijuana. We regulate registered service agencies representatives. We have our vapor recovery program in Phoenix and Tucson. Public weighmaster, timing devices, linear measuring devices, counting devices, water vending machines, and of course, cleaner burning gasoline. So all of these, I feel, would need to be factored into a risk-based inspection approach. And so continuing on, you can actually take some of these inspection categories and break them down into subcategories. So an example, small capacity scales. Well, you have your grocery stores, you have gold buyers, you have marijuana dispensaries, you have shipping facilities, FedEx, UPS. We don't regulate the Postal Service, that's federal government, but the little mailbox stores, industrial manufacturing, hardware, it goes on and on. So you can take some of these inspection categories and break them down even further if you identify that a risk factor lies within one of these subcategories. And so for the council members, at any portion in here, just please feel free to raise your hand or just start talking about whatever's on your mind in regards to if you have any questions or thoughts, because this is meant to be a collaborative effort here. The last piece of information that I'll leave you with before we get into the findings is currently weights and measures. We have 130,532 licenses. This is data that I pulled yesterday. At 20,469 regulated locations. Now, not all of those locations will actually have devices. There are some retail locations that we may just do packaging inspections or retail pricing and price accuracy. And to cover all of that, in a relatively large state, from a geographic perspective, we have 16 investigators, 2 of which are field supervisors who spend 50% of their time on administrative duties. So really those 2 field supervisors I count as 1 investigator. So you can pretty much take that 16 investigators and lower it down to 15. But that's what we have to work with as far as who is going to be implementing that risk-based inspection approach. It's going to be those 15 investigators. And, already we have a struggle with concentrating our resources, whether it's in a particular area or trying to touch and inspect every industry that we regulate. So there's some data for you. All right, so now to get into the findings. So as I presented during our last council meeting, the Auditor General Key Regulatory Responsibilities Report had 3 findings in particular relating to kind of the inspection approach for weights and measures, as well as the Environmental Services Division and the Pest Management Division within the Department of Agriculture. Our findings that were specific to weights and measures had more to do with the use of inspection resources. So there were findings that related to multiple visits by multiple inspectors to the same location, multiple visits to the same location to conduct different types of inspections. And then there was the skimmer inspections, only finding 104 skimmers out of 2,455 inspections. That is one inspection program that we could view at the time as a risk-based inspection approach, being that there's a risk factor involved with skimmers, the amount of money that a consumer could be impacted by if their credit card number or debit card number gets skimmed. But that was only 4.2% of the time out of all those inspections that we actually identified a skimmer. And then to add on to that, when we were conducting skimmer inspections, 43% of the time, the staff who were visiting those locations didn't conduct any other inspections at that site. And so that was one thing that the Auditor General highlighted. So since then, we've already implemented some procedures from a scheduling perspective to correct a lot of this, and we'll get into that later on. But to go specifically off of this recommendation, which is to require Weights and Measures Services Division to develop and implement a risk-based, data-driven, and internally coordinated inspection approach to ensure higher risk licensees and establishments are inspected and to minimize duplicated effort and travel. So that is what the Auditor General is recommending. We have to basically develop a program like that to utilize our inspection resources to the maximum and be most efficient. So these next slides will have some questions that are directed specifically for the council members, and I want to hear your thoughts and see what you have to think about it. So the first one is, what is a risk-based inspection approach? So when you read that, what does that mean to you? And I'm going to type along with some of your responses.
Well, this is Len from the grocery side of the business. I would think it'd be looking for opportunities with overcharging customers. And that would include anything from tear weight being correct, as well as for retail discrepancies for pricing and price posting. So, and I think that the biggest challenge there would be to establish possibly a history on, what I know that I have history for the last few years, and I'm sure you have more, that we could go back through and see if there was a pattern that was in there for certain facilities to go ahead that had maybe not responded as well to what had been discovered during your reviews.
If I could jump in, Kevin,
Yes.
Mark, just from my perspective, Lynn touched on the key word for me, and that's the history. I can't speak for retail, but upstream, the history of inspections, and if you've done 1 million inspections of our facilities and found no issues, the risk is low. So the key is that history. What have you seen at our facility that would necessitate further inspections, or which may minimize them? I think somebody mentioned it on our last meeting that the track record seems good for, say, fuel quality issues. If you went out on 100 service stations and only one of them came back off spec for volume or quality or what have you, in your mind, what is that? Is there great value of continuing to just go out for the sake of going out?
And both, this is exactly what I'm looking for. This is great information, to hear that from representatives on industry, because a lot of times we get focused on, what we're doing in our inspection programs, and we're looking at it from our perspective, but maybe not necessarily from an outside perspective. And so it's always good to have that feedback.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts?
I really wish we had the retail side for at least fuel. I can't speak for them, unfortunately.
What are the specific issues that you want us to address? I can at least speak for our fuel locations at Sam's Clubs and Walmart.
Well, are you speaking to me, Lynn, or Hadley?
Yes.
Only in that you guys have a lot of inspections, more so I think than I do at my level. And if you feel that relative to that history that I mentioned, is it an undue presence at retail?
I would tell you that we actually, welcome inspections. We think it's appropriate for the consumer to have confidence in the products that they're purchasing. I think one of the things that we spoke about with our legislative, I would say, aides or lobbyists was some complaint-based inspections probably could be handled more proactively and at less expense for weights and measures if there was some sort of telephonic or video review that was done. And I know, especially in the COVID climate, we've been doing a lot of our own auditing via Zoom and WebEx and those sorts of tools. And so, because there's certain documents that we could produce for your inspectors, so they didn't have to come out, for example, and do a vapor inspection or do a different type of inspection, especially when it comes to some of the consumer complaints, not all, but some. So that's what I hear in the industry, and that's what our fuel team hears fairly frequently. And we are actually ramping up to open more and more fuel stations attached to our stores. So you're going to see some of that coming. But that would be the recommendation I would have for you. Not that we don't welcome the inspections, but if you're looking at a solution to continue to serve the consumers and prevent potential fraud, that some inspection type could be done more virtually.
Yeah, those are great comments.
So I have a question to follow up on Hadley's statement. Is there an example of a particular scenario? Because we have looked at this in the past for some cases, like for instance, you have a consumer call in that the price sign out on the street is higher than the price at the pump. And, in the past, we've experimented with handling those type of complaints remotely, where we could actually have a representative from the location. We call them up or send them an email and say, hey, we received this complaint. Can you send us a picture of your pump and your price sign? And, if they match, that's great. If they don't, or whatever the case may be, because 9 times out of 10 on those specific types of complaints, it's that the consumer is not observing a certain piece of information, like the street price sign says cash above it. So the price that they see on the street, that would be lower than the price at the pump is actually the cash price because you receive a discount. And so we're able to resolve those without having somebody drive out to a location, especially if it's fairly remote, where it would take us a couple hours to get there. But that doesn't always work. And, I guess, is that kind of what you're describing, Hadley, like that type of scenario?
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm describing. And this could even translate across the pathway to general weights and measures, price posting, and price accuracy visits if there isn't an annual inspection that's due. So those are the kinds of things that I'm speaking to, where your inspectors potentially could effectuate greater number of inspections at a lower cost to the division and at a greater service to the consumer.
Kevin, I would add that would be applicable to our position as well. What this COVID business has shown is that these virtual meetings and whatnot can be significant and can take care of a lot of things rather than having inspectors come out.
Yeah, and I think it also bolsters consumer confidence that, everyone is being respectful of the COVID climate, and you're still, the consumer is still seeing the benefit of your services in the community and protecting the community And I can tell you that private industry, as I mentioned, we're doing it already. We've been doing it for the last 8 months, really pivoted significantly from in-store inspections, for example, versus Zoom inspections. And while you can't catch everything, it's very interesting what you do see that you may miss while you're in the building. So those are just some suggestions, obviously.
Well, this is all great information, and I think it's a good time then to move on to our next one, because this is the one that I'm really curious about, and I struggle with, as associate director for our division, is, well, what risk factors? Oh, sorry, we're not quite there yet. Let's go to that one though. Well, I think it's later on. So let's continue on. But what I want to get into especially is the risk factors, because that's hard to decide. Well, what risk factors are important for us to focus on. But before we get there, so if you remember, it's a risk-based, data-driven inspection approach. What does data-driven mean to you?
Again, I think that goes back to the history that we've kind of all spoken about, is looking back through what has been recorded by the state as weights and measures has been in store. I think data-driven also would refer not only to results of inspections, but also possibly just the total number of complaints and concerns that have come back from consumers.
Okay.
Not sure I can add much more than what Lynn said right now off the top of my head.
Well, and as we go through this, if you think, oh, I have a good point that goes back to that data-driven frame, then we can return back here. We can definitely go back and forth if needed. But I'll move on to the next one then. So internally coordinated. Is there anything that resonates with you here or stands out as to what this means to you?
Proper resources allocated to the proper job with the highest risk.
All right. Anybody have anything to add to that?
No.
I guess one concern that I thought when you're originally reading the statement was internally coordinated. I took that to be coordinated by the state, whereas I didn't really get the impression that it included the industry at all. And I think I just want to make sure that internally coordinated, I think, needs to be a two-way street between the agency as well as the industry.
And that's one reason that we're having this discussion today, because as we initially talked about it, within our department and our division, this was a difficult conversation to have, and we felt that it wasn't a decision that could be made on our own. We definitely need to have industry involved, because again, we have our perspective, but we don't necessarily have the external perspective a lot of times. And so, I think I agree that internally coordinated can mean not just within, state government, but also with the stakeholders as well. So I'm just going to type this in really quick. All right. So in regards to recommendation 1, some of the efforts that our division has made so far, in January 2020, our investigators were provided additional direction on scheduling inspections. So, for a while now, we've been trying our best, COVID aside, we've been trying our best to ensure that when we're visiting a location, we're doing as much as possible while we're there, so that in the long run, it hopefully reduces burden on the actual location, because we're not visiting, multiple times in a course of, a number of months or within a year. We're trying to do all of our compliance inspections right then and there on that day, but also it's efficiency from our operational perspective, where we don't have as much travel going on. We don't have people going back and forth within their districts. They cover a particular area and they hopefully focus on a next area going forward, and it kind of becomes a rotation. Eventually, once you get through your area and the different locations, you should then come back to a location that was inspected, maybe a number of years ago, and it's time to check on them again. That's what we're looking at right now. We also, are trying to conduct additional inspections at locations nearby. So, if we're at a grocery store that's located in a business plaza, well, what else is there in that business plaza that we could inspect while we're there? Because then we don't have to start up the vehicle. We don't have to drive however many miles to the next location. Our investigators are already present, and, we can try and be as productive at that location, within a day's work. Our investigators were also instructed to remain in their inspection districts unless assigned otherwise. This was something that was a little bit more of a loose rule in the past, but now people really aren't supposed to be scheduling inspections outside of their district unless it's like a specialized type of inspection where, maybe they're trained in large capacity scales or propane, and we only have a couple of investigators that do that. So they really need to cover, the entire state versus just their small district for, fueling device or small scales or things like that. And then the skimmer inspections, the investigators were instructed not to conduct those inspections unless they were assigned or conducting another inspection at the same location. Before, it would be a thing where we would do kind of a sweep of a particular area, especially if we found a skimmer or there was an area where we had a high amount of activity, but we don't do that anymore. It's really based on complaint only, or if we're at the location testing the pumps and we happen to find a skimmer. Those are the only reasons we're conducting those inspections now. Now, the other thing I want to show you really quick here, and I'll pull it up, is our Google inspection map. And this is something that our previous Associate Director, Michelle Wilson, created. And it's a neat tool that we hope to expand in the future. Let's see here. All right, I'm going to pull it up right here for you. Okay. So you can see that the state of Arizona here is dotted with different colored pinpoints. And what this map is representing is a graphic representation of particular types of inspections that need to be completed. And this is actually the staff district map. So this will show you where the investigators are assigned in regards to their districts. So you can see that we have the state divided up as even as we can get it. Any of these gray pinpoints are tribal land, so Native American reservations. And then you get into the Phoenix area and you can see we have people concentrated in specific districts, and this goes by zip code. But then also we have another map that shows particular types of inspections that are needed within an investigator's district. So if, I just wanted to look at my particular area for fueling device, well, all of these pinpoints that are a specific color are one investigator's assignments, and it'll go in and it'll show you, okay, all of these yellow pinpoints right here are my fueling device locations. And then these purple ones in my same area are locations that may have overdue invoices. So if I'm down here in Queen Creek inspecting this fueling device location, after I'm done, then maybe I can go over and see what this overdue invoice is all about, and see if there's an inspection that I can conduct and ensure that the license fee is paid, or maybe the location no longer exists and they didn't notify us. So it's trying to promote efficiency and give investigators a graphic representation of their workload. Right now, this map only has fueling device and small capacity scales because that's a scorecard metric that we have for this fiscal year. We are going to be talking about a new strategic plan and scorecard metric for the next fiscal year, and that's coming up fairly soon. That I think is going to be happening in April. But an investigator can click, oh, you can see the red pin here just highlighted. So now there's a grocery store with small scales that I need to inspect. So, if I'm doing anything else in this area, I can look and say, okay, hey, there's something for me to do. In the future, the goal is to have, whenever we get a new technology system, the goal is to have that technology system and database provide a graphic representation of everything to help increase efficiency for our investigators, because now all the people are provided with is a list, and that list is hard to read through unless you're really familiar with the address numbers and the system in your area and the zip codes. Otherwise, you kind of have to play with things and enter things, in a search engine to see, okay, where is this on the map? Where is that on the map? And it takes a lot of time. So that's another effort that we've made so far as trying to improve our inspection approach. So now the second recommendation is to require weights and measures to identify and document the risk factors that they will use to inform their risk-based inspection approach, and establish a process, not princess, apparently it spell corrected me, establish a process to periodically reassess these risk factors based on new information or changing circumstances. So this is one that I'm really curious about, because I think in the discussions about recommendation one particular risk factor was already highlighted, and I'm just going to put this down here on the board, and that is compliance history. So compliance history could be a risk factor. If you're talking about, looking at inspection records and things of that nature to see, okay, who do we need to focus on that historically has not complied with our regulations? Well, compliance history could be a risk factor. I have some other ideas that could be risk factors. However, I'm going to let the council member speak first and see if there's anything here that kind of resonates with you or that you'd like to mention.
Consumer impact. However you want to define that.
Well, and that's one where it could be, in most cases, we're looking at a financial impact on a consumer, right? Because they're buying something
Right.
off of a lot of the devices that we regulate. However, there are other factors on consumer impacts that you could think about, such as safety. Like if you have a motor fuel that, for whatever reason, is not up to specification, and then a vehicle, stalls in the middle of the road, or if you have a motor fuel that does not meet, emissions reduction requirements from an air quality perspective, well, that's an environmental impact that could affect a consumer's health, for instance. So consumer impact, I'm going to break it down a little bit more here. And so what other risk factors do people have in mind?
I think along the same lines as compliance, there would be complaint history, and they're kind of tied together. But if we see, places that are consistently getting complaints, even though when the state is in there doing an inspection and don't find any kind of results that way that backs that up, still want to go ahead and research that one farther as well.
Okay. And just to let the three of you know, and all of our attendees in this meeting, the three highest complaint categories, or what we receive the most complaints on right now, are fueling device. So that's your fuel dispensers. Water vending machines. So those are the bottle filling machines where you put money in, press a button, and it fills it up to, whatever volume is stated on the machine. And then retail price accuracy. Those are the three highest complaint categories that we have right now.
And I would just caution as a retailer, and I certainly agree with that recommendation, but there are circumstances, especially in the current climate, where there could be some specific animus toward the retailer or a location. And so that also has to be considered. So if it's the same complainant repetitively, and I know that's very difficult to discern, but I think it's just something in the back of your mind that you have to keep in check.
I totally agree, Hadley.
And I will add on to that, because I agree with that as well in certain situations. A lot of times I've taken a number of complaints since working in the office or as an investigator responding to them. And in talking to the complainant, a lot of times people make the decision to file a complaint based off of the interaction they have with the location employee, that either the location employee was, maybe they say, oh, they're rude, or they didn't give me what I wanted, or, there's people out there that believe that everybody's out to get them and take advantage of them. And, it's our job to investigate those complaints. And when we take in those complaints, unfortunately, we can't factor those type of statements into it. It's just that we're receiving a complaint. This is the concern here, that this item's not priced correctly, this scale's not accurate, this fuel pump is off. Even though sometimes, your gut instinct, just after having the experience of conducting these inspections over and over again, you go, this is probably something that's not a valid complaint, but we still have the responsibility to the public, and that's written under statute, to investigate those consumer complaints. And so that's a difficult one. And we try to educate the consumers as much as possible when we respond, especially if we find a complaint that is inconclusive or not valid, and say, well, this is the factors that led to, our inspection finding, because, this information wasn't there, or this information was presented according to our regulations. It just, next time you're in the store, be sure to look for this. And it's difficult, because you do have people that have a certain position, whatever it may be, and they feel that the best resolution for the situation they get into is, well, let's file a complaint with Weights and Measures. But we still have the responsibility, if we get those complaints, no matter how crazy they may seem, we still need to investigate them. So what else with risk factors, before I kind of offer up a few thoughts?
Well, I think you said mostly they've been covered: product safety, consumer confidence, fraud, repetitive circumstances, and, good faith business dealings. Those are all areas to consider.
So another risk factor that was mentioned in the past, and this was a discussion with other divisions as well. And I'll just type them down here and see what you think. But we have the percentage of population served. And so this one I always find to be interesting because, you know, we're all consumers. And if you think about, okay, what are the industries that I interact with the most? And there's data out there, and we've presented in the past in regards to fueling devices. But as a consumer, you can say that, well, I go to a gas station on a regular basis. I go to a grocery store on a regular basis, but I may not, go to a recycling yard on a regular basis and have my vehicle weighed, or I may not have my propane container filled as much, or I may not have this. And so the percentage of population served, I think, could be a factor in a variety of situations as far as what people's expectations are. Because I don't know if it's a lack of consumer education from all the things that Weights and Measures regulates, and sometimes people maybe just don't think to call us for that vehicle scale that's not accurate, or that propane meter, or whatever it may be. And I'm not trying to downplay any industry, because they're all equally important. It's just that, as an example, that's some of the things that you could think about as a risk factor. You could also think about the vulnerability of the population served. And that could be from a variety of perspectives, whether it's a demographic type of thing, or a particular geographic location where somebody may live. And, well, because they live in this part of the state, maybe there's not as great of a water delivery system for drinking water. So then, they rely on a different type of business to supply them with water. So therefore, they're more vulnerable in that respect. There's those other things to think about as well. But these two in particular, I was wondering if anybody had any thoughts on them.
Well, the percentage of population served, I understand where you're coming from, but I think with that one, and maybe the other one, that they're hopelessly linked to the history, I think. Fuel. Everybody goes to the gas station, but in that population size, what's the history of the inspections relative to that size? So there's a connection there.
So is that like, are you talking about like what's proportional to the population served, or like
Well, I think the history of compliance relative to that population size served is important. That's all I'm saying.
Okay.
I understand the concept of going by the percentage of the population, but there's a lot of history out there, and what has it shown? So just an analysis should be done of that to factor into that equation.
Okay.
That's all.
Any other thoughts about either of these? Percentage of population served, vulnerability of population served? Or any other risk factors that you think could be considered? It seems like there's kind of a focus on compliance history, complaint history, and the consumer impact overall.
I would just add in, in certain circumstances where there's, and it could be really inclusive of the vulnerability, but when you are speaking about grocery stores and necessities that the relative desert of the area can impact what may happen from a price posting, and consumer fraud or alleged fraud circumstance. So if you're out in a food desert, as an example, there are things that may happen that wouldn't necessarily happen in a metro location. And so however you want to include that as a risk factor where those people are particularly vulnerable, and it may already be included in the commentary that you just shared, but I see that with greater frequency, especially in certain demographic areas and certain areas where there is not a lot of resources to serve a population. There are not.
That's a great point. Okay. So we'll continue on here. So risk factors that Weights and Measures has historically considered, locations where most consumers conduct business. We talked about that, population served basically. We have considered compliance history in the past. We do have a data reporting system, and currently our inspection records go as far back as the system allows. And so we can look at those previous locations, and the compliance history will generally be more of a short term. For instance, one way you could look at it as if a retailer doesn't pass a price accuracy inspection, then within 7 days, we are responding back to that location after providing an education saying, hey, this is what our regulations are. This is how these items should be priced. You need to make sure that your system's accurate and so on. Then we return to the location and continue inspections at that location until compliance is achieved. And so that's one way that you could kind of look at compliance history. We do have the authority to inspect locations more frequently based off of previous non-compliance. We do have kind of the authority to make those determinations, and we've been focusing a lot on locations that have categories that have the most complaints received, because we feel that the consumers are speaking to us in those areas saying, hey, we continue to have a concern about this or that or the other in this particular inspection category, and so how can that be addressed? And so we'll conduct inspections, and if we find significant issues as far as compliance, then that's where we start working with industry and saying, hey, this is what we found across X number of inspections. What can we do to resolve this? So any thoughts here before I move on? So we'll move on to the third recommendation, and this is the last one. Require Weights and Measures to collect, maintain, and review sufficient data regarding licensees, devices, and establishments subject to inspection and the results of prior inspections to help plan and execute. So, this seems to align with kind of the risk factor of the compliance history. So you're looking at the results of prior inspections to help plan and execute your inspections. Does anybody, I think I know what this recommendation means to a lot of the council members, but does anybody have any additional thoughts?
Only that I think the results of those inspections are critical, whether they're good results or bad results. Just want to make that point.
I agree.
And it would be great to be able to see some of that history. I know that I worked with Michelle, and she pulled up a report of what had been reported for the last 6 or 8 months, and it was kind of a challenge to look through, but all information was there. It'd just be nice to have a good way to look through that and share that information.
And so with that, you know, our inspection records have always been available on our website for the public to look through, but you can generally only view it by location. So if you know an address or the license number or anything, you can view it by company too. You can search by a company name and it'll pull up all the locations and inspection history. But one idea that kind of came from Lynn's comment there is publishing some type of report on a regular basis, and that could be on our website of, you know, I don't know, compliance rates by industry, or, you know, common violations found, or, I mean, is that kind of something that would be beneficial to help make that inspection data more transparent?
It would be interesting to see how how public responded to that, because I know a lot of times having that much information right out there posted could drive some unwanted attention. Whereas just if it was available to pull up and request specifically for an industry, it would probably be a little more beneficial just for us as leaders in the industry, rather than just the general public. See where we need to focus our attention to help the consumers along the way.
Okay. And so, you know, our inspection records, and we can always pull together information, you know, through a public records request, and everything we have other than information specifically related to the petroleum industry, which is confidential under state law, we can pull that information at any time for industry representatives and provide that to and even summarize it if needed. But it sounds like perhaps it needs to be more accessible, or that information needs to be put out there that, hey, if you ever want inspection records about this or that, you can reach out to us and we can provide it to you. Is that kind of what I'm getting?
That's correct.
Okay. 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 Perhaps offer the... Okay. So we have our compliance tracking unit, which is our database. It manages our licenses and licensee data. It's the inspection scheduling interface. It houses our inspection reports. It can generate reports on compliance rates and productivity and so on. And it's been operating in this capacity for over 20 years now. We're looking to have a new technology application replace it in the future, which would be more efficient for not only our investigators and our staff, but also for the public to perhaps search through records or file complaints or you know, view information about what we do. But we do have the ability, as I said on the last frame, that if people want data about a particular industry, a particular company, a particular location, we can provide that. And all it takes is a public records request to do that. And we can provide that data. And like I said, we can help summarize it, and just say, hey, this is what the compliance rate is for this. And then you take the information and use it as you would like. So we do have our database, and someday we hope that we can improve on that. And that may be a discussion item for the future when we start to have the opportunity for redevelopment on what would the public or what would the council members like to see from our database in the future. But for right now, I feel pretty good about what we have, even as antiquated as it is. So where do we go from here? I'm going to start off and put a bullet point right off the bat is take with so we're definitely going to take all the comments from the advisory council into consideration, discuss it with our leadership and management. Part of this meeting and the content and what we're working on right here is going to be reported back to the Auditor General because they do follow up with us at 6 months, which is where we're at right now, and 18 months to see how we're responding to the audit findings and recommendations. But is there anything else that the council members would like to see, for instance, prior to our next meeting or in the future within a certain time frame, or a recommendation to make as far as kind of the direction that we go forward?
Well, we are missing several people today. So I would encourage everyone to get back with you if they have something after this meeting. I'm one of those guys that needs a little time to chew on things myself. So I don't know if anyone else can speak up, but those are my comments right now.
Yeah, I'm likely the same. So
Okay, well, I mean, this is all very helpful information in kind of helping us decide and determine our direction and how we respond to the audit findings. And so I really appreciate the time spent. And really that's it that I have for a risk-based inspection approach. So if there's no other comments from the council members, then I guess that's all I have for now.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Kevin. All very interesting stuff. And as we move down the agenda here to a call to the public, this is the opportunity for anybody on the call to speak up. And if they may want to add something or to that last point, please do so. This is your opportunity to speak up. So I'll give a minute. Or after the fact, communicate with Kevin and he can handle it from there. Hearing nobody from the public, we'll move down executive session. I see no issue for that, unless anybody can add something. And again, since we're missing a number of people, I'm not certain we want to nail down a date for our next meeting, but why don't we just throw out mid-June, 3 months out, and perhaps each of us can get with you, Kevin, to kind of nail that down a little bit tighter, where you can send a communication out. Can you do that?
Yeah, that's fine. What I'll do is I'll put a reminder on my calendar, and then I'll communicate to all of the council members as a group on determining our next the next date for our meeting.
Okay. Okay, I think that's it. Again, Kevin, what you've presented today was just fantastic, really interesting stuff. And at least on that last bullet point, the risk-based inspection, I really look forward to giving you some thoughts in the not too distant future here. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of everybody else. So that said, is there any other business that needs to be brought up? Because if not, I will adjourn the meeting as of 2:44. Speak up, anybody? Any business? Okay, hearing none, then thank you again, Michelle, Kevin, and I adjourn.
thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, thank
Thank
you
you.
everyone for
Thank
attending.
you all.
Okay,